Israel Update with Gadi Taub and Mike Duran. Hello and welcome to Tablets Israel Update. It's been a year, 2 months, and 10 days since this war began. I'm Gadi Taub in Tel Aviv, and in Washington, D.C. is our friend Mike Duran, not just friend, also senior co-host and senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. Shalom, Mike.
Shalom, Gadi. How are you doing?
You're dressed nicely today.
I'm always dressed nicely, no?
Not that nicely, though.
That's because I respect you. I don't come wearing black T-shirts
It's
like
not
a fascist.
It's an expensive sweater. We haven't been here for a week. That's 2 weeks. I mean, we skipped 1 week due to, we decided to say, unforeseen circumstances.
Circumstances beyond our control.
Oh, no, right. Circumstances beyond our control, which were also unforeseen. Because
Yes.
we kept thinking we could do it the next day and the next day, and then we couldn't figure it out. So now we deserted our post at a most crucial moment and around a subject on which Mike has been brooding for, can I say, years now, Mike?
It's true. I've been brooding over it for years. It's true.
Yeah, and now.
But before we get to that, will you just admit that you missed me over the last 2 weeks?
I missed you terribly.
How much? On a scale of 1 to 10, how much?
I cried. Is that enough?
How many times? How long?
Daily.
Okay, all right. Good.
I couldn't tell people why, though.
Sometimes you didn't even know why.
Yeah,
It was just
I just
a yawning.
melancholy mood that it took me a while to realize what's missing in my life.
Yeah, good. I to be honest with you, I was the same 1 or 2 days.
This is unbecoming of the serious subject which we are going to discuss. But before we do, I have some news from Israel, which, by the way, seem comical at this stage. You guys may remember that we discussed at length the aftermath of a failed attempt at a judicial review in Israel, which turned into a whole political storm, and then came the war and washed it away. And ever since, the Supreme Court has been, and the judicial system has been, getting more and more cocky. So what happened in our absence is that Netanyahu has begun to testify in his own trial. And I think we mentioned this on the show 2 weeks ago. The court refused his request to postpone his testimony, or even to dilute it under 3 times, 6 hours every time. So 18 hours a day, 18 hours a week, the prime minister is running a region-wide war, is supposed to testify about President Sirot in the form of champagne and cigar, because according to the court, this is a pressing public interest. And the reason I'm saying comical is that the hubris of Israel's judicial system is just becoming like a skit. And now they have decided that they will also nominate the chief justice. There's a procedure for that, and the procedure includes the Minister of Justice summoning the committee that should appoint the Supreme Court, the head, the president, it's called here, the president of the Supreme Court. And so Yariv Levin, the Minister of Justice, said, okay, we're at war. This is no time for judicial skirmishes, and let's find some compromise. But no, they've decided who the Supreme Court president should be, and they're going to force it. So they first forced Yariv Levin to summon the committee, which is his prerogative. And so they dictated a schedule in which he must summon them. And then he did, but he didn't put the question of the president of the Supreme Court for a vote in the committee. So now they've dictated a time for a vote. This guy, the justice or judge Yitzhak Amit, is going to appoint himself president of Israel's Supreme Court over and against the resistance of the minister, and completely outside the prerogatives of his office. This is why they are blaming everybody for conflicts of interests. And so what is going to finally bring down Israel's Supreme Court eventually, in my opinion, Mike, is
hubris.
Is not hubris, but laughter.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Hannah Arendt what said that nothing is so corrosive of authority as ridicule or laughter, and they are becoming funnier by the moment. So Yariv Levin is fuming, but I think personally he should be laughing at this stage. We'll follow this when things develop, but as we said, we have got a lot on our plate going on in Syria. So Mike, do you want to give us headlines first, or shall we just lay out the subject as a topic of discussion?
Let me give you headlines, because I collected a bunch of headlines to kind of give an impressionistic sense of how much the world changed over the last 2 weeks while we were weeping while we were weeping. Okay. So an Israeli delegation left for Qatar last night, Gadi, to make headway toward a ceasefire and a hostage deal with Hamas. Following persistent reports about progress in the talks, Defense Minister Katz said yesterday the Philadelphia and Netzarim corridors won't constitute an obstacle. Hamas is flexible on this issue. This is something that Hamas has been historically demanding, that Israel completely evacuate the Gaza Strip, including the corridors. One of the main issues that remains to be negotiated is the number and identity of the Israeli hostages and the Palestinian prisoners who are to be released. That's according to several news outlets. In Syria, the Syrian rebels and Israel have eliminated some 70 to 80% of Assad's military capacity. The Russians have also withdrawn their air defense systems and other major weapon systems. Last Thursday, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan was in Israel, and in Tel Aviv he spoke, observing that, quote, the balance of power in the Middle East has changed significantly, and not in a way that Sinwar or Nasrallah or Iran had planned. We are now faced with a dramatically reshaped Middle East in which Israel is stronger, Iran is weaker, its proxies decimated, and a ceasefire that is new and will be lasting in Lebanon that ensures Israel's security over the long term. That's a long quote.
An amazing success of the American policy.
Yeah, amazing. Their strategy succeeded. Last Saturday, Gadi, Palestinian Authority security forces killed a commander of the Islamic Jihad terror group in Jenin. That took place early Saturday morning, and it sparked clashes in the West Bank city between the Palestinian Authority and Islamic Jihad. Defense Minister Katz ordered preparations for maintaining Israeli control over the Syrian Hermon area throughout the winter months, ensuring control of a 235 square kilometer strip until an agreement with the new Syrian government can be reached. Britain, France, and Germany informed the UN Security Council of their readiness to activate the snapback mechanism, which would reimpose full sanctions on Iran due to its violations of the nuclear deal and the acceleration of its uranium enrichment. The Wall Street Journal reports that the Trump administration is considering the possibility of striking Iran's nuclear facilities. And finally, Gadi, in Syria today, British diplomats held talks with the leader of the new Syrian government. That's Tahrir al-Sham, following the ousting of Bashar al-Assad. Images posted on social media by the group show HTS leader Ahmad Ashara, formerly known as al-Jolani, meeting senior British officials in the Syrian capital. Over to you.
So, Mike, why don't we start, since you've been following this scene from is it from Obama's Red Line, or is that before?
Even before. This scene, meaning Syria and the Turkish interest in Syria.
Yeah,
I've been following it for a long time.
So I'll just say something about
Civil War broke out. Even before, I mean, I was highly interested in Syria when I was in the White House in 2005 to 7. That was a major concern of mine.
So it came on my radar mostly after 2011, when the war, the Arab Spring basically demonstrated that the principle of nation states is not a stable structure in the Arab world. But I'll say something about the general Israeli angle of what happened, and of the context of this war, and it would be very general, and then we can dive into Syria and Turkey, which I know little about. But if you look at what Israel did in this war and how Netanyahu presents it, so in his last press conference, what he said is, look, on October 9th, 2023, 2 days after the massacre, he said that we will change the balance of power in the Middle East, and we did it. What we did was crush the Shiite axis. He often calls it the axis of evil. So Iran is still at the head, but if it's an octopus, we sawed off most of its tentacles. And the way he described it, what happened was that Israel moved, I often use this metaphor, in a fan-like, in a sweeping movement from Gaza in the south through Lebanon and on to Syria, hopefully eventually taking out the Iranian nuclear facility and maybe doing to the Iranian regime something similar to what happened to Assad's regime. But having followed your writing on this, so the way the story begins, if I have to tell it to an Israeli audience, is when Obama defied his own, or did not enforce his own red line, and instead invited Putin and therefore also Iran to dismantle Assad's chemical weapons program. Now, Obama was proud of this when he did this retrospective interview with Jeffrey Goldberg in The Atlantic. He said that was when he broke with the Washington playbook and embarked on another policy, and that was the beginning of the policy which you and Tony Badran later called the realignment towards Iran, which is an attempt to rebalance the Middle East with teaching America's allies to share the neighborhood with Iran. And what happened now is that plan, we have Jake Sullivan basically confessing that the Obama plan is now dead in the water, and Syria seems to be the doctor that pronounced it dead in Syria, because that's where the attempt to balance it began. And what has happened in Syria is that Iran was basically expelled.
Yeah, I agree with all that. With some little minor amendments. The realignment begins long before Obama not enforcing his red line. And it begins in Syria. It begins with the withdrawal of troops from Iraq. But Obama went to when he was the presumptive nominee in 2008, still a senator, but it was clear that he was going to become the Democratic nominee. They just hadn't had the convention yet. He went on a trip to Iraq, and he met General Petraeus there. This is a part of the historical record. This is not scuttlebutt. And he told Petraeus that if he becomes president, we're pulling out of Iraq. And Petraeus pointed at a map on the wall and said, but Senator, if we pull out, there'll be a vacuum, and the Iranians will fill the vacuum. And Obama said, well, so be it. That's just the way it has. We have other priorities at home and elsewhere. So he had this idea in his mind already in 2008. It's an interesting historical question to ask where he got it. I have some speculation, but it's not important. But he was following this playbook from moment one. And the point in Syria where it becomes most important is 2014, when there was the siege of Kobani. I don't know if you remember that, and this has direct relevance to what's going on today, and to my criticisms of what the Israelis are doing. The siege of Kobani is a Kurdish town in Syria, right on the Turkish border. It's like 100 yards. You can if you're on the Turkish side of the border and you're looking into Syria, you're looking right at Kobani, and the ISIS came out of Iraq, and from Mosul to Raqqa was the ISIS caliphate, and the ISIS was put Kobani under siege. It became a domestic political problem for Obama. It represented the failure of his Iraq policy that this jihadi monster, ISIS monster, had grown up as the Americans had pulled out. So they didn't solve the problem in Iraq. He was under pressure to do something about Kobani and about ISIS. ISIS had already enslaved the Yazidis. That was a blow to him domestically. He was under pressure to do something. He had three choices. Choice number one or four choices: do nothing, which was not a choice. So he had to, in order to do something, he could send in American troops, which he did not want to do because he wanted to go down in history as the guy who had ended George W. Bush's war in Iraq. Didn't start another one in Syria, didn't want to start a new war in Syria. He could turn to the Turks, or he could find someone else, which he did. I'll get to who he found in a minute. But why didn't he want to turn to the Turks, his ally, second largest military in NATO, which is 100 yards from Kobani? He didn't want to do it because it was 2014. And Gotti, in 2014, what was Obama's number one priority?
JCPOA.
JCPOA, alignment with Iran, a new opening to Iran.
That's in case it has been forgotten by some of our viewers and listeners, in the midst of the past, that was the nuclear agreement with Iran.
The nuclear agreement, which he sold to the American public as a narrow nuclear agreement, but it was really the beginning of an effort by him, which he understood from 2008, to completely reorganize U.S. relations with Iran. He had to put the nuclear controversy off to one side so he could develop more normal relations, have a thaw in relations with Iran. And that was his number one priority. To get the nuclear agreement, he needed Russia and Iran. But Russia and Iran are the biggest supporters of the Assad regime. The biggest opponent of the Assad regime at that point and down to today really is Turkey. So if he worked with the Turks to defeat ISIS, then what he would be doing would be strongly strengthening all of the opponents of the Assad regime who were backed by Turkey. So that would queer his relations with Russia and Iran, with whom he was trying to reach some kind of regional accommodation. So Brett McGurk is now in the Biden administration. He's in charge of Middle East policy in the White House.
Your old job.
My old job. Brett McGurk worked in the Bush administration in the White House. With me. He was far junior to me, but he worked in the Iraq office. He worked in the Obama administration. He was the Syria coordinator in the Obama administration. He worked in the Biden administration. He worked in the Obama administration as a Syria coordinator. Then he continued that job in the Trump administration, and then he worked in the Biden administration. This is an extraordinarily talented bureaucrat with enormous staying power. So he's had more influence over American policy than people realize. He's the most popular guy today in Jerusalem. The Israeli government like him more than any other official in the White House. I mean, in the Biden White House. Why? Because when he showed up in Israel, they didn't know him. They have no idea what his history was in Iraq and Syria. He came with talking to them about Israeli Saudi normalization, and he doesn't harp onto them about the Palestinians. He's not interested in the Palestinian question. They don't realize that he is a major character, like Mali, like others, in the realignment toward Iran. So back to 2014, McGurk raises his hand and he says to Obama, I've got the guys who can solve your problem, who can help us defeat ISIS on the ground so that we don't have to do it. We don't have to put in large numbers of troops. And it won't queer the deal with the Russians and the Iranians. And who is that? That's the Syrian wing of the PKK. What's the PKK? That's the Kurdish underground terrorist organization recognized by everyone in the world as a terrorist organization, including the United States, including the EU, including the Israelis. The PKK wants to break up Turkey into a Kurdish state and a Turkish state. It's the number one. All Turks, not just Erdogan, all Turks, a majority of Turkish Kurds regard the PKK as the number one threat to Turkey, an existential threat.
They are, and they're Kurds also.
Kurds also. Yeah, yes, Kurds.
But the PKK are also Kurds. Now, Mike, repeat that because this is key. And if anyone missed one beat in this, they'll miss the whole picture. So let's lay out the map once again. There's
the PKK is in the eastern part of Turkey has a Kurdish majority. The eastern provinces of Turkey has a Kurdish majority. There is an underground in that area fighting the Turks, which wants to break up Turkey and create an independent Kurdish state. The PKK, it's a violent terrorist organization. The PKK is to the Kurds what Hamas is to the Palestinians. The Turkish state is more hostile to the PKK than the Israelis are to Hamas, if that's possible. So the Kurdish communities in Syria, which are on the border of Turkey, are extensions of the Turkish Kurds, meaning they speak the same dialect. For example, Kurds in Iraq don't speak the same dialect as Kurds in Turkey, but the Kurds in Syria speak the dialect of the Kurds in Turkey. So the Kurdish communities in Syria face north. They look north to their brethren in Turkey. They don't consider themselves Syrians. Well, they can consider themselves Syrians, but their ethnic connection is to the Kurds to the north. Okay, so there are PKK elements in Syria. Historically, during the Cold War, the Russians, the Soviets, and the Syrian government, which was an ally of the Soviet Union, used the PKK as an instrument. This is in the 1980s. Used the PKK as an instrument to put pressure on Turkey. So there's been historically Moscow, Assad, PKK in Syria against Turkey. That's the historic picture. Then when the Syrian revolution begins in 2011, Assad realizes that he doesn't have the forces to hold on to his regime. Why? Because Assad is an Alawite. Alawites are an offshoot of Shiite Islam. They're not actually Shiites, but they're not Sunnis, and it's a small minority, some 12 to 15% in Syria, and they own the state in Syria. The majority of Syrians are Sunni Muslims, so the army is made up of Sunni Muslims. And when the revolution begins, it has a flavor. It's not a flavor of Sunni versus Shiite, or Sunni versus Alawite. It's more complex than that for sure, but it has a flavor like that. And so what happens is the military made up of Sunnis, it's not reliable. There are lots of defections, and he has to take the loyal forces that he's got out in the east, move them west to save what he calls vital Syria. Vital Syria is this line of cities that goes Aleppo, Hama, Homs, Damascus, Deraa. If you look at it, it's all on a line, a straight line. That's vital Syria. He wants to move his troops. That's going to create a vacuum in the east. which is where the major Kurdish communities are. If that vacuum is filled by the Turks, if they come in with their Syrian allies and including Kurdish allies, that's a big problem for him because Turkey is supporting the revolution in Syria. So what he does is he cuts a deal with the PKK in the east, and they agree to arm them. And the deal between the regime, the Assad regime, and the PKK is that you will hold the eastern part of Syria, and when the war is over, you will hold the eastern part of Syria, and you will not allow your territory to be used by rebels against the Syrian regime. We understand, I'm Assad speaking here, we understand that you want to have autonomy in a new Syria, and we'll negotiate the contours of that when the war ends. Now, these guys also, the PKK, the Syrian PKK, which is called the YPG, the YPG at certain crucial moments fights with the regime against the rebels. Especially important, 2016, the battle for Aleppo, the YPG plays an important role in helping the regime.
So just to zoom out to make sure I understand the general contours. There is now, what you're describing now is an alignment of the Assad regime in order to save itself with the most vicious enemies of Turkey in order to save himself.
Yes.
So now the lines are hardening of the Turkey supporting the forces in Syria, which are to topple Assad.
Yes. And the PKK, the Syrian PKK, which is called the YPG, YPG, same thing. The Syrian PKK is working at times with the Assad regime to defeat the rebels. So the guys that just won the guys that just won in Syria hate the Syrian PKK. And the guys that just won in Ankara, the people backing them in Ankara, that's the Turkish state, hates the YPG PKK in Syria. Okay? You with me?
Yeah.
Now, when it came time to for Obama in 2014 to solve his Kobani problem, which was on all the nightly news in the United States, Brett McGurk raised his hand and said, Mr. President, I've got the guys for you who can defeat ISIS, help us defeat ISIS, and won't spoil your relations with Tehran and Moscow. Who's that? The YPG. And that sets up a relationship between American special forces and the Kurdish separatists of Turkey. Now you can imagine
anti-Turkish forces.
You can imagine what this does to minds in Ankara. For years, the most crazy voices in Turkey. Turkey is a country like every other Middle Eastern country, likes conspiracy theories. But the most crazy right-wing nationalist elements in Turkey always said the United States is secretly supporting the PKK to break us up and destroy us because the United States is really against Turkey, despite the alliance. So what they did, what Obama did in 2014 is he validated every crazy Turkish conspiracy theory ever. When I now go to Turkey and I talk to people and they accuse the United States of carrying out a policy that is objectively hostile to Turkey, I can't argue. What can I say? Yeah, you're right. It's as if the United States went into Jordan and used its special forces to build up Hamas in Jordan. And when the Israelis would turn to the Americans and say, why are you building up our worst enemy right on our border? The Americans would say, no, don't worry, we're not doing that. No, we're not. So what the Americans did. So anyway, let me go back to this and just so you understand, so you see. Let me.
But also in the way of a preview, this is all building up to say what Israel's interests are
Yeah,
Now,
no, to say what Israel's interests are now. So let me just jump to that quickly to how why this connects up to the present moment. Okay.
yeah,
So the because um first of all, let's understand that this is part of an American policy designed to align the United States with Iran and Russia. That's the whole purpose
the
of these
Obama
guys.
policy.
Yes, Obama borrowed a Russian Iranian proxy, that
Proxy.
is the PKK, in order in order to fight ISIS and maintain good relations with the Russians and the Iranians and the Assad regime. And that's Brett McGurk. Now, in the waning days of the Biden administration here, with Turkey having won, with the rebels having won, this is everything that McGurk worked against for years. McGurk is persona non grata in Turkey. Erdogan said publicly, I don't want that guy here in Turkey, right? Imagine that. Imagine, if Prime Minister Netanyahu said, I don't want Rob Malley in Israel. I won't talk to him. Forget
Oh,
it.
I
So,
wish you would. Yeah.
yeah, no, well, yeah, but this is, I mean, that's the level we're at here, right? So McGurk is selling these days, as we're speaking right now, he's selling to the Israelis. Among others, there are many Americans doing this, including CENTCOM. CENTCOM loves its little lily pad that it built up there in northeast Syria, U.S. Special Forces and PKK Kurds. But McGurk is selling to the Israelis the notion that they should be supporting that entity, the U.S. Special Forces YPG entity in northeast Syria, as a way of putting pressure on the new regime and on the Turks to look after Israeli interests. Now, and so the Israelis have come to see that entity up there as an Israeli interest, even though it is part of the realignment toward Iran. They don't understand it. They do not understand that this is part of the realignment toward Iran. And when I say Israelis don't understand it, I'm talking about Israelis from top to bottom. Top to bottom. Okay? They don't pay attention. They don't pay attention. They don't know who this guy McGurk
But
is.
what
And they
but what
don't.
you're saying basically, Mike, and correct me if I'm summing it up incorrectly, is that if Israel is tempted to this American offer to align itself with the American Special Forces PKK combination, Israel is setting itself up for an unnecessary conflict with the new dominant power, which is Turkey.
It is setting itself up for an unnecessary conflict with the new powers with the new forces in Damascus. It's setting itself up for an unnecessary conflict with Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And it's setting itself up for a conflict with the entire Turkish establishment and Turkish people. There's no group that's more hated in Turkey by everyone than the PKK. And it is regarded by the Turkish security establishment as the number one security threat to Turkey. The number one security threat. So now, because Erdogan is supportive of Hamas, rhetorically, he's attacked
He's hosting
Israel.
some of them.
Huh?
He's hosting some of them.
He's hosting some of them. He's made very hostile statements with regard to Gaza and so on. There's a tendency on the Israeli side to say, well, this is just tit for tat, so they do this to us, we'll do this to them. I think this is a mistake. I think it is whether you can justify it morally or not. Let's not talk about morality here. We're talking about state interest. It's a mistake for several reasons. Reason number one, those guys are losing. When I say those guys, the YPG, YPG, PKK. Now the Americans, if I can go on another little historical detour here. The Americans recognized that they had a problem. McGurk recognized that he had a problem politically, domestically and abroad, when he's supporting the YPG. No American official can go before Congress and say, and when they say, sir, when a senator says, sir, to say the Secretary of Defense, and this has happened. This is not a fanciful thing. This has happened on multiple occasions. Mr. Secretary of Defense, is the YPG the PKK? They have to say, if they're to be even halfway honest, they have to say, yes, the YPG is the PKK. So to dilute, to get rid of that picture that the United States is supporting a vicious terrorist organization that is the number one enemy of the second biggest army in NATO, of a NATO ally, to get dilute that picture, they created what they call the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces. What is the Syrian Democratic Forces? It's a pyramid at the top of which is the PKK. Underneath it are Arab militias. And so it looks like a mixed Kurdish Arab thing. And because it has this diverse characteristic to it, they call it the Democratic Forces. There's nothing democratic about it at all. But the other thing about it is, if you're looking at this from Ankara, this is more upsetting than the United States having a special military relationship with the PKK. Why? Because the Kurdish communities along Turkey's border are, there's three major enclaves, and they are separated geographically one from the other. So they're not contiguous. And between them are what? Arabs. So when you create the SDF, when the Americans created the SDF, they created a militia that can control, a militia controlled by Kurds, controlled by the PKK, which can control Kurdish and Arab territory together, which is the great aspiration of the Syrian Kurds, is to create what they call Rojava, which is an autonomous Kurdish principality from the Mediterranean to the Iraqi border. If you have the greatest power on earth behind you, the United States, and it's putting Arabs underneath you, this becomes a going concern. Otherwise, naturally, there's no way this could ever happen because of the demographics. So this is why Turkey started intervening directly into Syrian military, with its own regular military into Syria. If you go back and you look at the various Turkish operations, they're to slice up what would be Rojava, which the Americans were creating without admitting it, helping to create. And so the United States and Turkey have been at loggerheads since this all began, because the Turks are not going to let Rojava come into existence. I mean, you could just think.
The lack of enforcement of Obama's red line created a vacuum into which Russia, Iran, and Turkey were all pulled in eventually.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely,
and that is because we are too accustomed to saying the Syrian people, the Syrian nation. There's the Syrian state. Syria is a theoretical entity and has always been only held together under the boot of tyranny, because it's a product of the 1916 Sykes-Picot agreement between England and France, in which the colonial powers just took a ruler and just drew lines irrespective of who the populations were. And so they created, and inside the straight-lined borders of Syria, there's actually a whole melange of people's
Syria's
grievances and hostilities.
Yeah, it's like Italy, you know. There's it's like, when I say like Italy, it's very striking when you go from north to south in Italy, how each province, each area has its own unique character. And they're all like Sicily. Sicily is a different country from Tuscany. You know, this is not the same country. But
I'm not sure I like the comparison, because here there are amazing animosities, and Italy was successfly united. And this is the tapestry.
The mafia in Palermo might tell you different.
So, yeah, well, the mafia in Palermo and the PKK are not on the same are not on the
Yeah.
same scale.
Yeah, okay. There's not. Anyway. Yes, fine. There's no. This is fun to discuss, but it's not important, right? But the outside powers get involved, and in Syria, as in Lebanon, every outside power grabs its ethno-religious regional group and to project its interests into the mix. And the Israelis are tempted right now. They are tempted right now to grab hold of, if only rhetorically, to grab hold of the U.S. Of the U.S. PKK entity that exists in northeast Syria. Now, I happen to think that this American policy was the dumbest, and this is like Donald Trump always says, this is the dumbest thing ever. I actually think I cannot think of a dumber policy the United States has carried out since I have been following American foreign policy. And it is the dumbest thing. And the pro-Israel community in Washington loves it, loves it. I'm very much at odds. I'm a member of the I think I'm a member in good standing, I hope, a card-carrying member of the pro-Israel community in Washington. But I'm at odds with a lot of them because they look at that PKK, U.S.-backed PKK entity in northeast Syria, and they love it, and they want to support it, and they clamor in support of it. But I just say this to you, Gotti, since this thing came into existence, I have been saying consistently, emphatically, it is not going to last. The Turks will destroy it. They will destroy it. And what I have said is coming true. They are destroying it. It's not going to last. So you can feel as good as you want. The Israelis and the pro-Israelis who are backing this horse now, they're going in and they're betting on a horse after the race has been run and the horse has lost. This YPG entity with the Americans, it's a zombie. It's a walking dead. It's not going to live. And more than that, Donald Trump is likely to pull the plug on it. This is a near certainty because Donald Trump gave the order to Mattis when he was president in his first term in office. He gave the order to Mattis on multiple occasions to withdraw the troops from northeast Syria. And Mattis defied him. The American security establishment defied him. Brett McGurk, who was working for him, defied him. And so it has become, inside MAGA world, inside the Trump coalition, it has become a symbol, like with Comey and the trials against Trump. It has become a symbol of deep state defiance of a MAGA foreign policy.
So, according to what you're saying, Mike, it's not only that Israel is going to get in trouble with Syria's new rulers if it supports this PKK USA combination, it's also going to be in trouble with Turkey, but also with the incoming administration.
Yes. Well, with the hardcore MAGA element
that doesn't sound like anything Netanyahu can't cope with, Mike. as he's demonstrated, your judiciary is missing. But so let me play the devil's advocate here for the most of the Israeli supporting community in Washington and say, yes, but in the end, you are underestimating the inevitable clash with Turkey, because not only is Turkey supporting Hamas, it is also the host of the Muslim Brotherhood. It is ideologically opposed to Israel, and it is a highly religious country. That is, we cannot just calculate their realpolitik interest. We have to take into account that their head of state is very religious and ideologically motivated. So
that is what everyone says, and I don't agree with that with that analysis on multiple levels. And I think you are, by saying that the clash with Turkey is inevitable, you're basically saying that Israel and Turkey have are in a zero-sum contest in which any advance by Turkey is working to the disadvantage of Israel, and there's no way to avoid conflict. And I don't believe that at all. Let me just start. I'm going to answer some of the things you just said directly, but let me start from the picture of where I want this to go. I think we all have to think about what is the ideal outcome here? The ideal outcome is a Syria that, from the Israeli point of view and from the American point of view, the ideal outcome is a Syria that doesn't threaten its neighbors, a Syria that's not hosting Iran, Hezbollah, and it's not carrying out jihadi attacks across border into Israel. A Syria that's not trying to destabilize Jordan and the Gulf. The Gulf states are as worried as Israel right now by the fact that there's an Islamist in power in Damascus, because there's nothing that makes monarchies and autocracies in the Middle East more uncomfortable than seeing a populist Islamist taking power and toppling another autocrat, as much as they didn't like Assad and thought he was a butcher. So they're nervous, and they're nervous that Syria will become that. In my view, Turkey and Israel have a shared interest, and I think the Turks understand this clearly, the Turkish security establishment and Erdogan himself, that Syria be a kind of a buffer state between Turkey and Israel, much as Jordan is a buffer state between Iraq and Saudi Arabia and Israel. That's what we want. We want to turn Syria into a buffer state. We can do that.
That would prevent friction.
That would prevent friction between the two. The Turks do not regard, there's no way that the Turks regard the destruction of Israel as in their interest. There's no way that they're thinking about a jihad. No Israeli general, when making plans for the next year, is thinking that the really likely outcome is we're going to be in war with Turkey. If you mess around, however justified you feel on the basis of what the Turks are doing with Hamas and so on, if you mess around with the PKK in Syria and you latch onto that, if you threaten the Turkish influence in Damascus, you are asking for the world that you say exists but actually doesn't, meaning one in which the Turks actually regard Israel as an enemy, and one that they need to actually organize against, and they could organize jihadi attacks against Israel. I don't think that. I think that will not happen, but you are unifying inherently.
Inviting it.
You are what's that?
Inviting it.
You're inviting the thing that you most fear. That's the way to say it. You're inviting the thing.
Do you know the beautiful Hebrew expression, Asher Yagorti Bali, that which I feared had come onto me. So but you're saying more than that. You're saying that by succumbing to this fear, or by acting on this fear, we are actually, like in a Greek tragedy, bringing onto ourselves.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. It's exactly what I'm saying. And the Israeli and pro-Israeli attitude toward Erdogan and toward Turkey in general is a really bizarre mix that I've never seen in a people before, of tremendous fear, trepidation, combined with contempt. So, and I've never seen that before. Fear and contempt. If you fear something, then you recognize that it's a really serious issue. Then you can't be contemptuous of it. And if it's a serious thing, a serious, powerful, threatening thing, then it requires study, and it requires you to use all of your faculties to deal with it. Look, it's also an objective fact. I found it. I've often believed, not often, I have always believed that the key in this era in which the United States doesn't want to use military force in the Middle East, the key strategy is for the United States to work with Israel and Turkey to defeat the Iranian resistance axis. Now, that just happened. but without the American strategy. The amazing thing is the Assad regime was destroyed, was crushed between the hammer of the IDF and the anvil of the Turkish military. While the United States worked against both Turkey and the Israelis in that regard. What if the United States had not carried out the McGurk policy and had worked to be the shock absorber between Israel, to keep Israel and Turkey apart, but work to have them move in parallel to defeat the Iran and its axis? That could have happened. The proof is it just happened. Now, it was funny for me when that happened. I felt vindicated in my analysis. I was also happy to see this horrible, murderous regime of a kind, murderous, on a level that few regimes in the world are. I was happy to see it gone. I was happy for the Syrian people. And I talked to Israelis, and they're really worried. Oh no, here we just destroyed the resistance axis, the Iranian axis in Syria. Here comes Turkey. Oh no, oh no. And instead of saying, look, clearly the Turks and the Israelis have some overlap, very significant overlapping interests. There are areas in which they clash, absolutely. So the challenge for the Israelis, and I think for the Americans, is how do we, sorry, I'm getting a call here, which I have to decline. Are you there? Did I lose you?
I am. I am.
How do we get how do we maximize the overlapping interest and minimize the clash? And I think the exact wrong way to do that, the exact opposite, is supporting the PKK.
Yeah. So in the end, I'm not going to argue the case because I'm way out of my depth here. But in the end, the question is one of a quantitative assessment of the ideological versus the realpolitik, because
exactly
once Iran is gone, it is not. Would you agree that it is not out of the realm of the possibility that after this buffer state is created and the overlapping goal of defeating the Axis is finished, that Turkey will eventually reorient itself, or may have the opportunity to reorient itself into a direct conflict with Israel? Is that, and I would say, since my arguments are all external, they're not rooted in any knowledge of Turkey, but rather in a wider analysis of global forces, is the question: will Turkey align itself with the West strongly enough so as to make a direct confrontation with Israel too problematic?
Now, look. Let me make a number of points there. Let me start with the biggest one, which is the realpolitik nature of Erdogan. If Erdogan is an Islamist, he comes out of an Islamist background for sure. If he's an Islamist in terms of his policies, then he's a guy who is Islamist with his mistress. His mistress is Islamism, but his wife, to whom he's devoted, with whom he has kids, and who he's never going to leave, is realpolitik. It's Turkey. It's Turkey's national interest. It's his actual family and their status and everything. If you follow his career, it is full of some of the most breathtaking reversals, ideological reversals, that are really, there's not another major leader on earth, I think, that has reversed himself the way Erdogan has. It's one of the things that's particularly interesting about him. I'm not saying that he doesn't like Israel. There's no doubt about it, and it's deep and it's personal. But this is like his hatred for Israel is like his mistress on the weekends. He sees her, he sits with her, and he talks about the world that might have been, in another universe. But you know what? I've got this wife, realpolitik, but more than that, this is where I think Israelis really misread Turkey. Turkey is much bigger than Erdogan, much bigger. And Turkey is a post-Islamist society. And this happened in the, if we were having this argument a decade ago at the time of the Mavi Marmara, something like that, I may have been given greater credence to these arguments. But the people making these arguments haven't paid attention to what happened in Turkey over the last decade. There was a quasi-civil war in Turkey that culminated in the coup attempt in 2016, which was an intra-Islamist civil war between Erdogan, the AK Party, and the Gulenists. It exposed enormous corruption of Islamists in Turkish society. The Gulenists were the Gulenists had infiltrated the military, the police force, the judicial system, and then they clashed with Erdogan, and Erdogan uprooted them from a lot of these areas, and the whole public saw this Islamist beast inside the Turkish state. And there's been a revulsion as a result from it. The revulsion from it, and it's a well-known, well-established fact that the kids of the AK Party is Erdogan's party, the kids of the AK Party are more secular than their parents. So there's no big ideological Islamist push. Number one. Number two, and so I trust so wait, let me I left out a plank in the argument here. It's crucial. Erdogan, after the coup attempt, had to make his peace with the nationalists. And when I say nationalists, I mean there's a nationalist party, the MHP party, which is really just the parliamentary reflection of the deep state, of the security establishment. And Erdogan, the state today in Turkey is a kind of hybrid between Erdogan's AK party and the establishment, the military, who are realpolitik to their core. And they understand what they want is a stable security arrangement in Syria that will serve the Turkish state. Now, the Turkish state was forced to move southward and move deeply into Syrian politics for two reasons. One, the flood of Syrian refugees into Turkey. Syria is now in Turkey. There are millions, 3 to 5 million Syrians in Turkey. So it's not that Turkey's in Syria. Syria is in Turkey, right? That's number one. Number two, the United States supported on Turkey's borders the number one enemy of the Turkish state. So the United States, the stupid national security policy of the United States pulled the Turkish military into Syria. And when we first started doing this, the Turks were not set up at all. They didn't have this thing they now have, the Syrian National Army, which is their Syrian proxy, which does whatever they want it to do. These are Syrians controlled by the Turkish military, kind of like the Wagner Group is for the Russians, but under the direct control of the Syrian of the Turkish military. They created that to fight the American policy. So whenever the Turks do something to fight the Americans who have aligned with their number one enemy, all of the supporters or many of the supporters, I got to be careful with my language. Let me not engage in hyperbole. Many of the supporters of Israel in Israel and in Washington say, see, they're not good allies. They're really bad allies, completely ignoring the fact that the United States started this fight with Turkey
by sticking a finger in their eye.
More than that, threatening to crack them up. This is a serious existential threat.
We'll be talking about this probably in the following weeks, not at this length and detail, but hopefully you'll keep the map in your head, or we'll remind you of the general contours so we can follow what Israel is doing. We have reason to believe that Israeli policy has not solidified yet in Syria. And we will be able, I hope, to tell you more about this in a future episode. Will we, Mike?
Gadi, I never let you have the last word. You made a point of this last time, but I'm not going to let you have the last word here. I got to say two things, if you'll permit me. One is I want to summarize. I want to have a concluding remark to everything I just said. And the second is, I think we should say a little bit about viewer or the mail we've gotten from viewers, if it's okay with you.
Yeah, sure.
The first thing is that what I think as sane. Remember, we are as sane as possible under the circumstances.
Yeah.
The sane Israeli policy should aim for Turkey being Turkey turning Syria into a buffer state, and arriving at enduring security understandings between the new Syrian government and Israel. And Israel can count on the realpolitik character of the Turkish establishment, which is an equal or even greater partner to Erdogan in the state. Erdogan has basically ceded control of security defense policy to the establishment. This is what I think Israelis are not seeing. And I'm not saying that the defense establishment in Turkey likes Israel, but it is going to follow the Turkish national interest, which aligns with the Israeli interest in very significant ways. The problem with the Israeli support for the PKK is you are uniting Erdogan and the establishment against you, and that is a blunder of the highest order. Okay. Now with regard to viewer mail,
yeah,
a couple of things that we had. I just want to acknowledge we got you remember it was 2 weeks ago. We've got some fantastic responses from people, both in the comment sections, but also in private correspondence with us about, remember, from the fierce comes the sweet.
yeah.
I just want to thank everybody for that. We got I think it was from Shoftim. No, is that where it was from? I've already forgotten, but we got the biblical references, all of the discussion of it. And maybe at some point we should actually share some of that. There was some very learned, including from our friend Tony Badran. We had who's a genius on things like this. We got we had some very learned discussions of that, and some.
So what is the English? What is the English though?
There were very creative. Responses with, if you can't, if you've got lemons, make lemonade. And
but I wanted to go for the King James translation, and they all centered around the fierce. From the fierce comes the sweet.
Yeah, from the fierce comes the sweet. Well, we'll organize a little discussion of this at some point, and like in the next episode.
Yeah, we can't postpone it any more than that.
No, and then I have here. There's one guy I wanted to respond to him. There's a guy named Roger Eastwood. I wonder if that's a real name. Sounds a little bit made up, but maybe it's real. And he says,
"It's Clint's pseudonym."
It's It's Clint's. It's Clint's younger and dumber brother. He says, "Get this Duran fool off of here. Gotti is fantastic and does not need the clown show from Michael Duran." Right? There were two people came to my defense, to our defense, and said both are very. Chava P5398. She said both are very good, and we are most grateful. Thank you, Chava.
You always pick the ones who are trying to drive a wedge between us, Mike. We should show greater solidarity.
I have a feeling I know why Roger said what he did, and I just want to flag this. We can talk again. We'll have to talk about it later. First of all, Roger, you poor benighted fool. You need me more than you know. I think the key word there, Gotti, is that he called me a clown. And I think that suggested to me that what set him off, what's the button I pushed? I called Ben-Gvir a clown in our last episode. And I got a lot of criticism for that.
I thought he's referring back to the beginning of our conversation that nothing undermines my authority more than your laughter. How's that interpretation?
My clown. It could be. Maybe it was the connection, the two of them together. But no, there are things about Ben-Gvir that I really don't like. I would like at some point to discuss that in greater detail.
Yeah, there is good reason for that, because as we said in the episode that we aired before we missed one 2 weeks ago, the attempt of Shabak and the state attorney to punish officers in the police and the jail service for obeying Ben Gvir is actually very important, because the one thing that Ben Gvir did, a lot of people are calling Ben Gvir a clown. A lot of people say he's all rhetoric and provocations. That's all he knows how to do. I heard from one government official, a very high government official, say, look, Ben Gvir was not only never in charge of any organization, he was not even a member of any organization ever before he became a minister. But it seems that they are underestimating the importance of what Ben Gvir did in Israeli jails, because the Shabak, the security service, Shin Bet, you usually say in English, has had a policy of appeasing terrorists in our jails, lest they explode with anger and order terrorist attack outside jail. So the Shabak policy has been to pamper them. They were never afraid of our jails before Ben Gvir. Now
I understand that he's that he comes across at times as an antidote to the worst aspects of, let's call it, Israeli wokeism, right?
Yeah.
That there's a concepcia that grew up, and we like these disruptors, or there's an attraction to the disruptor who comes up directly against the concepcia and forces people to deal with it. But I don't like ethnic and religious chauvinists. I don't like them. They're dangerous. Even if they serve even if they get, it's like even a broken clock reads the right time twice a day. Sometimes they may have good points, and maybe they're the only ones making the points. But I am very uneasy by ethno-religious chauvinists in any context.
Yeah, I agree. They are dangerous, but one, Ben Gvir seems to have been moderated in many ways. And secondly, even if he is disagreeable, what he did is nevertheless important in our jails. And what the Shabak is trying to do is basically threaten or scare into submission the people in the police and the jail service who have been obeying his orders, making the life of terrorists in our jails harder. So that is something we will have to talk about, because it's one inflection point of the different orientation of the Israeli deep state towards the two-state solution and the Palestinian Authority, and the right-wing government, which is dead set against the very idea of returning to the so-called two-state solution. I get a lot of comments saying, stop calling it the two-state solution, start calling it the two-state idea, because it was never a solution.
The two-state delusion. Yeah,
the two-state delusion is not bad.
I know you're gonna close. I'm gonna let you close off when I say this one last word.
Please do.
Do you remember in our last episode, I think it was, I drew did I do this, or was it with you in person, where I drew a bell curve and said that the mass of the Israeli public and the mass of the American public is, in the big part of the curve, but the elite is drawn from the narrow, and what we need is a new elite that represents the actual where the majority of the population are in terms of some of these key questions. There's a problem, I think, with creating a cosmopolitan religious nationalist. That's what we need, is a cosmopolitan religious nationalist elite. People who are not highly parochial and just playing to the most base instincts of their population. The amazing thing about Netanyahu is that Netanyahu is the bridge between secular, centrists and religious nationalists. He can move comfortably between both.
I can say something very clear about that, because I'm a Herzlian and a Ben-Gurionist in this respect, and their conception of the international map is a family of nations. That is that is make America great again is not make everyone else small again. It's each country should make itself great again. And there is now an attempt to create such a coalition internationally, because the woke, being globalist and cosmopolitan in this facile way of international imposition of their conception of human right and choose your own sex or gender and so forth. They have a one size fits all formula for the whole world. Nationalists are insisting of the uniqueness of every nation. So if you go back to Johann Gottfried Herder and basically say that nationalism, and for Jews this is very resonant, enables each group of people to be themselves and to preserve their own identity. And therefore, making Israel great again is not at the expense necessarily of anyone except their sworn enemies, which was, by the way, the reason that for years I did support the two-state delusion. I did, because I thought that, as it says in our Declaration of Independence, it is the natural right of the Jewish people to be like all peoples, masters of their own fate in their own nation, in their own sovereign states. That is the universal principle of self-determination, but you can't determine yourself in a general way. It always has to be specific. So let's close these parentheses here. Shall we do the dumbest take?
Oh, I don't have one.
Because I can just mention one. This is a whole mine of dumb takes, because Yair Lapid, head of the Israeli opposition. Speaking of clowns, he wrote an autobiography, a political autobiography of the war, including the war, and it's called Milchama v'Chalom. Now, Tolstoy's great work, War and Peace, is called in Hebrew Milchama v'Shalom. Now, he didn't want to presume to be Tolstoy, but he wanted a word that rings the same and yet means nothing. So it's Milchama v'Chalom. It's war and dream. And this is, let me tell you something. And this is funnier than a dumb mistake.
No,
created.
The thing is that you understand how his mind works. I like that.
I'll give you a cliche or two before, because they slashed him in Haaretz, and it was just Carolina
in Haaretz.
In Haaretz, they slashed him. It's murder, and people who don't speak Hebrew probably don't know, or hardly would have reason to know, that there is a Yair Lapid cliche manufacturer site in which you put a subject and you get Yair Lapid style cliches. But what is funnier, there is.
I didn't know. We have to put the link in the description, because I didn't know this.
If you speak Hebrew, there is a quiz in which you are given sentences and you have to determine whether they were taken from Yair Lapid or the IKEA catalog. And nobody scores perfect.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, no, it's unbelievable. So this is full of unbelievable cliches, and maybe in one of the future, maybe I'll just sit and translate some of them for your amusement next time.
But give us also the link to these are two sites then, right?
I'll have to dig up the quiz. I once took it. I think I scored like 60%. And I follow Yair Lapid for a long time.
And you have an incredible sense of language as well.
And also it's nothing to be proud of, but there's circulating on the internet a whole list of descriptions of my attempts to define Yair Lapid's way of thinking, the most popular of which that it's like a market of fake brands in Thailand. It rings better in Hebrew, but everything is shiny and nothing means anything. And the fact that he would have the gall to write his own autobiography on the war that he wanted to quit a million times. I mean, it's not just about the war, but he's not. Is he pretending to be a war? He was a substitute prime minister for a short few months, and now he's Churchill, or in his own mind. I mean, he doesn't say that. That's an exaggeration. Anyway, we are closing this Syria special episode.
Not yet.
You're kidding.
No, I want a public service announcement. I'm going to. I don't think I'm going to get it done today. So tomorrow, I suppose, or the next day, I'm going to make a short video just of me. I have unearthed the plan, the secret plan of the Biden administration to kick the Israelis as it goes out the door, like Obama did with UN Resolution 2334. I'm going to unveil the plan that they're cooking up.
Do you think it is preventable?
I think it's preventable. That's why I want to put it out, what they're doing. And I want to encourage the Trump team and the Israelis and Congress to take action to stop this nonsense. I'll just, we
will put it on our channel. We will put it. So
Good.
If you're following our channel,
I'll put it on Twitter. I'll send it to you. You can put it on the channel. We should also explain to everybody why we have persistent problems with Rumble. We're committed to Rumble. We're totally committed, but the upload process to Rumble is often very challenging. So we are almost always delayed on putting it up. This is just a technical problem, but we are committed to Rumble.
All right. So on that happy note, can I, Mike, end this show?
You may.
With your permission, I will end this show, and hopefully there will be no, what did we say? Circumstances beyond our control that will prevent our recording the next one on Tuesday next week. Thanks for watching.